Daniel Ricciardo may have lost his spot on the grid for 2023, but he isn't done with Formula One just yet. In fact, if anything, his Red Bull move has reignited his hopes of returning to a top team in 2024. And guess what? He's feeling pretty confident. In today's video, we're going to talk about the Australian's positive outlook for his future in the sport and more. So keep watching. First off, Ricciardo is feeling confident about his 2024 return. The Honey Badger had one of, if not the worst season of his career last year. Not only did he lose substantially to his teammate in the Drivers' Championship, but he also ended up losing his McLaren seat. Sure, he probably could have opted for a team that's lower down the order like Haas or Williams, but that's never been the goal. For him, the top priority has always been to be competitive and get podiums. Now that may sound like a tall order for a driver who, in some races, struggled to get into the top 10. Still, he's convinced that he hasn't lost his racecraft and competitive edge. Of course, displaying that supposed talent is going to be the tricky part for him in 2023, as he won't be taking part in any races. Well, at least until Verstappen and Perez are fit. That being said, he's got practice sessions and simulator runs to impress other teams to hire him for 2024. And there's a tiny issue though. One full year is a very long time in Formula One, and it doesn't take long for people to forget you and move on, especially if you're getting old. So returning to the grid after a hiatus is going to be super difficult for Danny Ric. Then again, he doesn't get the doom and gloom at all. In fact, if anything, he thinks he can make it back easily. After all, there are plenty of other examples like him on the grid too, including Fernando Alonso, Kevin Magnussen, and Nico Hülkenberg, all of whom have made some pretty impressive comebacks in recent years. Up next, Daniel looks toward the trio of F1 returnees. Obviously, each of these drivers has had very different careers in the sport, so perhaps putting them all in one bracket doesn't really work. According to Ricciardo, however, they're all perfect examples of the fact that even if you spend a couple of years away from the sport, there's always a chance for you to come back. Speaking with Crash.net, he said Hülkenberg should change his name to Hülkenback. After all, he's come back so many times after leaving the sport now. What's more, the Aussie also talked about how the German situation gives him hope for his own future, because even if people doubt his ability to get a seat in 2024, he's got faith that he can pull it off. For him, what's important is knowing what you need or what sort of thing will help you, so he doesn't have any regrets about taking a year off and thinks this move will do a lot of good for him. Now, you could say that Hülkenberg's situation is very different from the Honey Badger, as even if he's been in and out of the sport over the past few years, at least he's been consistent. Like, sure, he may not be the fastest driver on the grid and may have the worst podium record ever. That being said, a team like Haas doesn't care about that. All they need is someone who can deliver consistent points with minimal errors, which again isn't something we can say about Ricciardo right now. So perhaps he shouldn't hedge too many bets on mimicking Hulk just yet. What's more, Ricciardo says the time off will help him recover. Of course, Nico Hülkenberg isn't the only example out there. In fact, over the past decade or so, we've kind of gotten used to these drivers who just sit around on the fringes of the sport trying to get another chance. Oh, and the list is pretty long too. Seriously, just start naming them. Alex Albon, Esteban Ocon, Alonso, Magnussen, and it goes on and on. So the 33-year-old isn't wrong to look toward them for a silver lining. In fact, he even admitted that while everyone's obviously wired differently, these examples are still reassuring to look at. He then talked about how taking a year off could have a different effect on you depending on the type of personality you've got, meaning a similar amount of time off for Ocon isn't going to be the same as it is for Fernando. Not to mention, all these guys are in very different parts of their careers and have followed their own unique trajectories. As far as Ricciardo's concerned though, he thinks removing himself from the sport for a while would prove to be powerful for him. Besides, finally having some free time to gather your thoughts and refocus on your craft after years of relentless racing never hurt anyone, did it? Well, even if it did, the Honey Badger is adamant that he's made the right choice here. So seeing all these other drivers returning is just the icing on the cake for him. Not to mention, Alonso's time off was very productive. Now, the Australian thinks that his route and the current situation are more similar to Alonso's than everyone else, because even when Nico or K-Mag didn't have seats, they were still always ready to hop into the car. The Spaniard, on the other hand, straight up retired from the sport and didn't have any way into it for a couple of years. And that, for Ricciardo, is important since it gives you the time to actually disconnect from Formula One and work on your comeback. That being said, there's obviously a massive difference between the Honey Badger and the two-time champion's hiatus from the sport. For starters, Daniel's been quote-unquote fired from McLaren, while Alonso just straight up decided to retire from the sport after a frustrating season full of reliability issues. It was almost as if he'd lost his love for Formula One, which is a stark contrast to Ricciardo. What's more, Fernando's time off was extremely productive, as he went away and raced in other motorsport competitions around the world, including the Indianapolis 500 and Le Mans, in a bid to complete the Big Three. Danny Rick, on the other hand, is going to stay at Red Bull and continue to work on the simulator and other sponsorship commitments for the team. Moving on to Red Bull's plans for Ricciardo. Speaking of what the Australian's going to be doing at his new/old team, let's talk about it for a bit. When the Aussie signed for Red Bull at the end of last season, the team said that he'd be their third driver rather than your usual reserve driver. That said, there's an extremely fine line between the two terms, and they aren't exactly that different from each other. In fact, usually the only difference is that Ricciardo's going to be a bit more involved in the day-to-day workflow within the team. If you're still not sure what exactly his job is at Red Bull, however, then the team boss Christian Horner's got you covered, as he recently sat down with the Australian outlet Speed Cafe to break it down. He said that, first of all, they were surprised to see the driver available in the open market because he's definitely more capable than people give him credit for, and that's why taking him on made sense too, especially since he's grown up with Red Bull and was there during his junior years too. So bringing a driver with so much experience and such a high profile made perfect sense. That said, Ricciardo shouldn't expect any promotions in 2024, as Horner made it clear that they've got no plans to use him other than in the third driver role. Oh, and of course, he's going to be performing a bunch of commercial duties too. After all, he's a global superstar and is one of the most recognizable faces in Formula One. So yeah, the sponsors are going to be all over him. Coming up, the Australian will also do a bunch of testing. Now, Horner talked about how Daniel had a tough couple of years and how he hopes this 1 year with the team will help him reignite that passion and love for the sport. And to help with that cause, they're going to allow him to test the car out on track as well. For instance, he'll be attending some races throughout the season as their reserve driver, ready to jump in if any of the other drivers can't compete for some reason. Plus, he's also going to lead a major chunk of their commercial activities in the US since he already lives there. What's more, Horner thinks that the Honey Badger's going to be very busy in the States since they've got 3 races over there. Not to mention, he'll be taking part in Pirelli's program to test out their tires too, in addition to all the simulator work, so he's definitely not going to be free. Besides, we expect him to hop into the car for a few free practice sessions during the season too. After all, his goal is to secure a good seat for 2024, and it won't be possible if teams can't gauge his performance levels out on the track. Finally, Ricciardo won't be helping with the powertrains. Okay, so if you didn't already know, Formula One is overhauling its power unit regulations in 2026, which will allow a bunch of other manufacturers into the fray too. And of course, Red Bull is also one of them, as they've got plans to form their own powertrain department too. But according to Horner, Ricciardo won't really be a part of that development process because, well, it's a bit too far off. He talked about how we won't see a Red Bull-designed power unit in the back of a car, so there's not much he can do on top of that right now. And to be fair, no one's expecting him to stay at the team beyond 2023 either, because if that actually ends up happening, then let's just say that we probably won't see him on the grid again. So yeah, the next year is going to be absolutely crucial for the Honey Badger, and he needs to prove to the rest of the grid that he hasn't lost his mojo just yet. What do you think though? Can Ricciardo make a comeback and land a good seat in 2024? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.